All right, thank you. So thanks very much for having me. I've been wanting to do a performance observer talk for a while now, so I'm really excited to be here. And the topic that I'm going to be talking about is something called the performance plateau. And if you haven't heard about it, that's okay because I'm going to explain what it is, why it matters, how to actually find it, and then how it's really useful information and what you can do with it. And I will keep my introduction brief. Um, I'm Tammy Everts. I wear two hats right now, so I get to wear two fun party hats. SpeedCurve, where I've been working for almost 9 years, was acquired by a company called Embrace, which does mobile front end observability in November. So SpeedCurve very much still exists. Our tool still exists. So I kind of work on the SpeedCurve side of things, but I also work on the Embrace side of things. So it's really fun. And I'm lucky to get more opportunities as part of this acquisition to have more time to do more research and do more talks, which is kind of what I've been doing in the performance space for the past 16 years. So my background is user experience and usability. And really what I focused on for the past 16 years is the intersection of performance, user experience, and business metrics. And more, it feels like, especially, the last few years, there's this urgency to connect performance with business outcomes to prove the value of our work and make ongoing investment into our work viable. So that it feels like feels like a good thing to be doing these days. So over the years, I and you have probably heard a lot of the same questions. And those questions come from people maybe within your performance teams or your performance purview, but maybe it's people outside your performance team. Maybe it's executives or other folks. And those questions are, or even these are questions that come from you. I made my pages faster, but business metrics didn't change, user engagement metrics didn't change. Why? Like, was my whole optimization project even worthwhile? How fast should I even be then? And how can I show the business folks and other folks in my organization the value of page speed and why we need to invest in it? So these are probably the three most burning questions that I hear. And the great thing about the performance plateau is it can be really, really helpful in guiding you to answers to all of those questions. So what it is, kind of in a broad sense, is just a point where if you make your performance metrics change, you make start render faster or slower, you make largest contentful paint faster or slower, but you no longer see any measurable business improvements or user engagement improvements. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey to how we got to understanding why the performance plateau is kind of answering that question. So, short history of something we call correlation charts. So these have been around for quite some time. My coworker Cliff, who some of you might know, Cliff Crocker, he and I've been really lucky. I've worked with Cliff three different companies way back in our SOSTA days together. And then at SpeedCurve for many years, and now we both work together at Embrace. So Cliff is awesome, and he, even before I knew him personally, these are kind of his invention. He is one of the kind of early pioneers and proponents of real user monitoring and how to really like actually extract real insights from it. And he came up with these charts. We kind of jokingly call them Crocker charts after him. And what these show you, if you're not already familiar with them, is two main things. You see these bars. These are the cohorts of user sessions that experience different rendering times. In this case, the bars represent LCP times, largest contentful paint, which is one of Google's core web vitals. And largest contentful paint, for those who aren't familiar with it, is the metric that tells you when the largest or ideally most important visual element on the page finishes rendering. So we can see this distribution of session LCP times over all these different sessions. And then this blue line, and it's just kind of a coincidence that the blue line actually kind of tracks along the bars. They don't always, and you'll see that in a minute. But the blue line shows us conversion rate. So we can actually correlate conversion rate to these different session lengths, or sorry, the different LCP times across these different sessions. So we can see in this case that at 1.1 second, that you get the peak conversion rate of 6%, which is really great. And then you can see how conversions drop as LCP times slowly degrade. And that 2.5 seconds, what's really interesting, this is Google's recommended threshold for LCP time. It's already dropped down to 2.5% conversions. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. So these are the kinds of things that a correlation chart can show you. So it's really, really exciting. It's kind of nice to see how things like conversions can track to rendering metrics. But when you look at a chart like this, a couple of questions sort of pop up, and oh, sorry, I actually wanted to talk really quickly about the other things you can do with conversion correlation charts or correlation charts. You can use them to test different KPIs. So for example, this is a different correlation chart that's showing us LCP time versus bounce rate. And you can also validate different metrics. So for example, LOAFs, long animation frames. My colleague Andy Davies, who I also worked with at SpeedCurve for several years, and he's also now at Embrace, he did an investigation of LOAF total duration time and saw that there was a correlation that how bounce rate, or sorry, how conversions dropped when LOAF total duration time increased. So it's a really good way to kind of validate, is this metric that we're tracking that we think we should care about, does it actually map to user experience or business metric? So this is what I was going to start talking about next. When you look at a correlation chart, there's a couple of questions that pop out for a lot of people if they're paying attention. One is, well, wait a second, Tammy, how come there are all of these pretty fast LCP times at the beginning of the histogram, but they have really, really low conversion rate? It's a really good question. I used to think that the answer was mostly that they were things like error pages, but actually it's more, and that was kind of the simple answer that I used to give people. But really, there's a bunch of different reasons why those could be the case. Maybe it's just that the bucket size is really small and not too early in the morning for me to try to say this. Statistically significant. All right, got it out. Or more and more, we're getting bots and scrapers and things like that. People leaving pages open in their tabs, and then the session times out and it reloads. And also still error pages. So that's why fast pages can fail on significant KPIs. But wait again, why is there this long tail? Why is it that we see, even though 2.5 seconds is Google's threshold, it's kind of things have sort of bottomed out in this case, and kind of just start wavering up and down. And there's just, it kind of doesn't really seem to matter. Conversions, if we were to draw a trend line across this long tail, would kind of be about 1.5%. Why is that? And so we call this a performance plateau. And we started to wonder, once we noticed this trend, and I'm using the royal we, of course, I started to wonder, and I got other people to start to wonder, does every site have a performance plateau? Is the performance plateau, does it look more or less the same across different sites? And then where do Google's thresholds for core web vitals land on the plateau? And does this vary across different websites? So the nice thing about having access to lots and lots and lots of real user data is that we can query it and ask these questions. So we did an investigation. This was actually a group we, not just the royal we. Some other people were involved in this as well. And we looked at 4 sites with a significant amount of traffic. We captured data for about 30 days. And for this particular investigation, we correlated start render to both start render and LCP to bounce rate. And the reason why bounce rate is kind of my go-to, my default whenever I want to do an investigation, is because it's pretty easy to capture by default in most RUM tools. It's pretty accessible if you want to do these investigations using your own RUM tools. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of a flash tour through the charts for the 4 different sites. So site A, what I want to call your attention to is, oops, there we go, is that the best bounce rate, taking out kind of that first cohort of all those kind of outlier cases that I talked about earlier, was just over 56% at 0.5 seconds. And the performance plateau started at 2.5 seconds and was almost 70%. So, you see a bit of a hop there. And that's when we looked at start render versus bounce rate for one site. For the same site, we saw that the trend line kind of slowed down for LCP, but similarly, the best bounce rate was under 50% at 0.5 seconds, and yet as LCP time, it slowly crept up to almost 10 seconds. Bounce rate hit 84% and change. So slightly different, but you can see the performance plateau emerged for both of these sites. For site B, you can see already that there's a difference between how these lines are tracking. But what you can see that it kind of emerges across all of them is that the jump in start render tended to happen a lot faster, and the slope was a bit slower, more gradual for LCP versus bounce rate. But they all kind of get there eventually. In this case, the slope is a little bit quicker for site C, but again, kind of longer for site D. So the big takeaways when we looked at these 4 sites, and I don't want to claim that these 4 sites kind of represent the breadth of what you could expect to see with RUM data. You really need to look at your own RUM data to see correlation charts. But what we took away from this, and I think are good things to bring to your own observations if you do this investigation, is this very clear distinction that every site was different and unique. A clear plateau did eventually emerge for every site for both metrics. We noticed that plateaus can start really, really quickly. And we noticed that the difference between the optimal bounce rate and the plateau points can be quite broad. That median performance often lied within the plateau. And importantly, really, really importantly, if you are using Google's thresholds as your thresholds, those thresholds might be a little too optimistic. You might be kind of really sandbagging yourself and leaving some opportunities on the table. Because as I said before, when Google's saying 2.5 seconds, but you can see that actually your best bounce rate is at 400 milliseconds, by the time you're content with serving people this 2.5 second experience, you are missing some really clear opportunities to make your users happier and possibly help your business. So moving on to how to find your own plateau. First, you need to kind of pick that combination of performance metrics and business metrics. So I showed LCP and bounce rate, but you may need to experiment with different combinations. So I've done investigations of INP and bounce rate. INP stands for interaction to next paint, which is a responsiveness metric. I've done investigations of INP versus conversion rate. I showed you Andy's investigation of low-offs to conversion rate. So you can experiment with different combinations depending on what it is you're trying to prove. You'll need to gather a significant amount of RUM data. I have found that, if you get below fewer than 5 million page views in your bucket, your total bucket, your correlation lines might be a bit wobbly. The trends start to kind of settle down the more data you have in your charts. So 5 to 10 million page views is typically a good bucket size. If you have more, that's even better. And then what's really great is, we've had correlation charts in SpeedCurve for a long time. Other RUM tools are starting to include this feature, so it's something to ask your RUM provider for. And then what you can do with your findings, you can do so many things, which makes these findings really, really helpful. Share with your stakeholders, help them see the opportunities. Um, use these charts to explain why improvements haven't moved metrics. If you know that your performance plateau starts at 2 seconds and continues on for the duration of the long tail, you can tell people, well, yeah, we improved the site, LCP from 8 seconds to 4 seconds, which is still good. It's great that you did that as part of an incremental improvement process, but it's not going to change your business metrics until you kind of are serving those LCP times that are closer to your peak conversions or your best possible bounce rate. And then reset your performance goals. And I'm just going to keep harping on this. Think beyond core web vitals. I'm actually working on another LCP investigation post that I've got all the data. I'll probably finish the post in the next week or so, that has kind of some interesting new findings that kind of really validate this idea that we need core web vitals are great. We definitely need to be aware of them, mindful of them, but we need to think of them as really more of a starting point than a finish line. And I'm quoting Tim Kedlick, who some folks might be familiar with when I say that. So as I said, goal setting, you can see this like kind of wiggly long tail, and you can see that, 2.5 seconds, maybe that's your bottom threshold, but really your goal might be more like at 1.1 seconds or faster. And then how to track this over time. My recommendations for people that I talk to are do this monthly, do this plateau analysis monthly, and track it over time so that you can kind of have this current baseline and you can see how things change over time. So ideally you have more and more as you make your optimizations and make your improvements, and maybe as your user traffic changes as well, right? Because RUM doesn't just tell you about how your pages are built. It tells you about who your users are and who's coming to your site and what their environments are. So you'll want to repeat this analysis on a monthly basis. Compare your distributions over time. That's really, really important, as I said, to kind of just see like, well, how have your users changed? And then update your performance goals as needed. So perhaps on a monthly basis, but as you see changes, make sure that you're keeping your goals up to date. Your takeaways, you always, especially these days, you really need to connect performance to business. If you want to have bigger conversations outside your team, if you want to make sure that you get your higher ups to grow your performance team, ideally, to keep investing in the tools that you need to do and giving you the time that you need to have to do what you need to do, you need to connect performance to business outcomes. And recognize that fast isn't fast enough unless it moves the needle on user behavior. If it's not helping your users, it's just not fast enough yet. And that you need real user data to guide decisions. I saw on LinkedIn yesterday, somebody shared a stat that I think it was according to the H2B archive, like roughly 1 in 5 websites use RUM now, which is great. And I know that that's across a lot of websites, and a lot of sites probably don't care about RUM because maybe they're just kind of vanity projects or things like that. They're not retail sites or news sites that really need to care about this. But 20% is good, it's not great. So yeah, ideally, everyone who is answerable to their business for various metrics around bounce rate and correlation and conversions, you really do need real user data. So yeah, like we can open up for Q&A if anyone has any questions. If you're watching this talk later on as a video recording, this is where you can find me, kind of all the usual places. And I would love to talk about correlation charts and business metrics and whatever else people want to talk about.